Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Big updates coming out of Mugello. Ferrari ran their promotional event today, but it was a filming day in name only. They tested their new rear suspension, major changes to it. We're going to see the side-by-side over the coming minutes as to the changes they've made to the wishbone, the new packaging of the gearbox, as they try and get the rear of that car under control in the second half of the season. Reports say it's a pretty major change, and one that performed well on track, but we'll only see over the next couple of weekends, certainly in Spa, where they are set to debut it, whether it's actually going to make a difference to their season. Very much enjoy to your thoughts on a comment. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new, as always. I greatly appreciate it. 10 years ago today, by the way, that Jules Bianchi sadly passed away from injuries associated with his crash at the Japanese Grand Prix back in 2014. Long does his memory live on in the sport. Bottas is looking to be back on the grid. There is this big rumour that maybe Alpine would even consider it as early as mid-season to get rid of Colapinto. The thing is for Alpine, as we're about to see in a second, there are big rumours that money is a major consideration right now for that team. As a result, would keeping Colapinto maybe make more sense in some capacity? Possibly. So Bottas is looking at Cadillac, he's looking at Alpine. Let's be honest, Alpine are a more attractive option. They know how to build a decent chassis over there. They just need the engine, and the engine's potentially coming with Mercedes. The integration would be a question. The team is in, shambles right now, and maybe that will never change with Renault and the way that team tends to be. Briatore is back in charge, as we know, but theoretically, for Bottas where he is in his career, you would expect that might make more sense than Cadillac if the opportunity is there. And it's not like Colapinto's done any better than Doohan at all since he's been in the team, and there's even talk that maybe mid-season in the summer break, this type of move could potentially happen. The other big talk, though, around Alpine is actually whether the team's even going to exist anymore. So there was an exclusive from Planet F1 today saying that given the Renault shares have dropped in price a lot, there's actually a lot of turmoil internally right now at Renault. So this is what was said. We know that loads of people have left over the last few years. Ollie Oakes, as we know, not long ago, stepped down as the team boss. Further to that, it has been suggested a number of the rank and file have also elected to depart the organisation, with sources suggesting a significant number of trackside personnel have tendered their resignation. This has been downplayed, but not denied by the team, reason that while some staff have indeed tendered their resignations, it was nothing more than normal turnover. A spokesperson for the team moved to distance that operation from the turmoil that has engulfed the Renault group in the last week with the stock price going down and all that type of stuff. So, it's just a real feeling right now because the Renault CEO is gone, their revenue has gone up, but their cash flow has stood still, and it's all a bit of a shambles for Renault, for Alpine, for the entire brand. So, as a result, there's a real feeling as to whether this Formula 1 project even makes sense. We now know in the world of Formula 1 that these entities are massively valuable. It wasn't long ago that teams were struggling to stay afloat. Now these entities are valued at near enough $1 billion each, and some teams far more than that. It's a serious asset that, could even cash flow as well, but it's certainly a major asset on Renault's books that they might consider parting ways with if the opportunity has arisen. So it's a big talking point really of the last couple of years. Apparently sources have suggested one approach has been made in recent weeks with the offer of a $1.2 billion sum. It was understood that this was immediately rejected, but nonetheless, right, when you've got numbers like that flying around and the team has elected to shut down their engine program, which is maybe an indication of where they're looking to go, it's a lot of cheddar to turn down if the buyer might be right and if Renault feel like they could need it right now. So I'm not saying this will happen, but it does feel like if any team on the grid, with the exception maybe of Haas and Toyota potentially being interested there, Alpine feels like the entity potentially most likely to sell and to go away. Couple of other updates up and down the grid. This out of Williams. We know that for a few Grand Prix in a row, they had major issues with their car, and that has not gone away. They did manage to finish the Silverstone Grand Prix, although it was far from spectacular what they might have hoped for. And James Vowles says, yeah, we are struggling with our cooling issues. And, well, on hot weekends, maybe it's going to become increasingly challenging. As he says, we've had this cooling issue for a few races this year, probably more marked in the Austria retirement when we were running in a very strong position. Elaborated on the team's efforts, did lots of work in FP1 in Silverstone to get to grips with it. They've got some temporary solutions, but it comes at the cost of performance, right? So, what would you prefer to do? Risk it and hope you finish P6, or not risk it and maybe scrape a point. I don't know. You obviously don't want your car to explode because it's very costly. So presumably they will go for the latter. And Val says that, yeah, there's some optimism about it. We can regain some potential. And actually, they've got a small update coming to Spa. They did say a while ago that they were focusing fully on 2026, and I believe that's true. I'd imagine this upgrade has been long in the works and just now has been produced, or maybe they planned it to come a little bit later. So concerns again for Williams, but they're confident they can at least prevent their car from breaking down. It's a matter of can they be competitive and also do that, which right now does not seem to be as competitive as they were at the start of the season. Max to Mercedes continues to be a talking point. I'm sure we'll discuss it more over the coming days. It would be so fascinating in many ways if that happened, especially I would say if Russell stays, to see how Max would get on in that car, how he would go in, George's team. I mean, let's be honest, it wouldn't be George's team for long if you bring in the consecutive reigning 4-time world champion to the outfit, although that is unlikely to be a 5-time at the end of the season, which is really why Max is considering his options right now. But this is a 7-time world champion, and he was at Mugello today driving a Ferrari. Now, there are reasons why they went to Mugello. It seems because of all the tracks they can drive at. So a couple of reasons here. One of which being they did a demo day in addition to the filming day. So the demo is only like 15 kilometers, but you're not allowed to do that at a Formula 1 track. You can go to other tracks like Mugello, but you can't do it at an F1 track. You can do promotional events at certain tracks as long as it doesn't conflict with when you're actually going to be racing there. For example, I don't think they would be allowed to do a filming day at Monza because Monza is not far from now. So I think, there are rules in place to prevent you trying to get data. The reality is that it's pretty obvious why Ferrari have done this. And as much as they try to put rules into place to prevent the teams using these promotional days purely to do a private test, it doesn't really seem to stop them, right? One of the funny things about the F1 movie, if you guys have seen it, and this isn't really a spoiler, Brad Pitt, or Sonny Hayes, or whatever, he turns up to the team and he does a private test at Silverstone with the team in their current machine, which of course is very much so not allowed in F1. You can't just rock up and do a private test for any old day, any old weekend if you want to. There are rules in place to prevent the teams doing that, and this is one of them. But to be fair to the F1 movie, these are rules that can be circumvented in various ways, and it seems that that is what Ferrari have been doing. Now, Mugello is important because it is a very high-speed track, certainly in the first sector. Obviously, a mega track, I'm sure, to drive. Hamilton commented on that plenty of times when they raced it back in 2020. But also, pretty hot there was the talking point. Stressful on the car, stressful on the tyres, tons of G-force, right, around Mugello. So Charles was doing, I think, some short runs, some qualifying sims. Hamilton was doing some longer runs. We'll see the evidence of that in a second. And in stressful conditions for the car, right? So if you want to put the car in under pressure, as it were, Mugello is one of the tracks that you can film at because it's not a Formula 1 circuit right now, but also it's a track that you might learn an awful lot from. So this was, I think, Charles Leclerc in the car this morning, and here was Hamilton in the car in the afternoon. So Hamilton did a similar run in the afternoon, testing the new rear suspension. Now, before we get to the rear suspension, this is a pretty interesting development. So they did a few laps. This might have been what they called the demo day, right? It's kind of funny how the teams, let's say, ride very close to the line in terms of what's legal and what's not. But they did a demo day and they used the old configuration, right? So just to say, get a couple of laps in around Mugello in whatever way they can. As I've said, like the tyres that they are able to use here are not the Pirelli, they're not the race spec compounds. So there is a lot of simulation work to be done to compare and contrast between the different compounds. But they'll definitely have got a feel for it, right? They can throw on the tyres and say, okay, Lewis, go do a few laps here with the old spec, see what the data says, see what the feel says, and then this time tomorrow, in exactly the same conditions, I guess would be the ideal scenario, we're going to do it again. Because if they did the run in the old rear suspension, let's say in the morning, and then the new one in the afternoon, different track conditions. So I think the intention was to say, okay, we'll do it, ideally, 24 hours after each other, right? Try and get the same track conditions to compare, and however many laps they can do, they will do. So the intention was collect telemetry data with the older rear suspension around Mugello, and then pass that into what they did today. So Leclerc was on track with the new rear suspension in the morning, doing mainly short run stuff. Hamilton was then on track in the afternoon, doing, it seems, mainly long run stuff. And that's what was said. Leclerc did shorter stints, Hamilton did some more longer runs, the weather was very hot, and the track layouts put the car under significant stress, which is a good thing. I think that was the intention, right? Difficult conditions, hot conditions, the tyres are going to be struggling, the car's going to be struggling, tons of G-force, as we know at that track. So if you're going to get information on what the ride height looks like and the changes that they're looking to make, this would be a good step in that direction. So these are the changes they've made to the wishbones, and it seems to be a substantially different structure. So the theory goes that they were intending to move the cockpit back slightly this year in the car because it would give them more stability and just create greater performance, full stop. But actually, it's come with a compromise that at the rear of the car, they've changed the casing of the gearbox, and it turns out that their old rear suspension design, which you guys can see here outlined at the bottom right-hand side, was simply not delivering consistent performance at the back of the car, so they had to raise the ride height. It was costing them loads of performance because it was just very unstable, especially under braking. The changes they've made are substantial, right? I mean, okay, they've moved a wishbone from there to there. You might think, whatever. But when you look at it side by side, in reality, this is a pretty major change. They've undergone deep interventions, required a new design of the case that covers the gearbox. So, this is not a small deal, right? And other teams will be looking at this and thinking, damn, we've been working on 2026 for months. Ferrari have been fiddling around with their rear suspension in what is, a pretty major change. To make this type of adjustment mid-season, they must feel like if this works or doesn't work, they're going to gain a lot of knowledge for next year at the bare minimum, because they will need to, given the resources this will have cost them. So this just a couple of angles. The older version on the right-hand side, you guys can see a little bit of a different angle in the wishbone as well. And of course, where it connects to the car is also pretty substantially different. This is a much better to show it really from this perspective. This is the new wishbone angle, and obviously at the rear of the car, and this is the older one. As you can tell, the images have been flipped, but obviously it's symmetrical, so it's basically the same deal. And yeah, it's substantially different, right? Okay, it's not maybe a side pod has magically disappeared from the car like we saw back at the W13 in 2022, but as far as final year regulation of the regulations go, this is a pretty major thing to mess around with, and Ferrari have done so, and reportedly they ran without any major issues. It seems like it was a success on the car. How they felt about it, that is a different question, but it is intended, according to the guys at Auto Racer, to go ahead for the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. So that probably tells us enough to read that, okay, they put the new rear suspension in, they've gathered the data, and look, whether it performed perfectly, because at the end of the day, you put a new rear suspension on, you've got 200 kilometers of running that you can do. You've got 100k with Leclerc, 100k with Hamilton, and that's about 20 laps each. So you want to get the setup dialed in. What setup are you going to use? You've got a brand new rear suspension, so getting the setup figured out, especially for a track that F1 doesn't race at anymore, is a challenge, right? So lots of reasons why it's going to be difficult for Ferrari to come away from this and be particularly confident in what they've tested, but they will have some idea, certainly. And crucially, they will have driver feedback, right? And Leclerc and Hamilton will come out of today, and I'm sure they will be asked in the press conferences in a few days' time how it felt at this test. That's certainly what I'd be asking them, but I'm sure they'll be giving their feedback to the team tonight, and, they will either be pleased for the direction of the second half of the season or they will not be, right? We know that drivers have made it very clear for years that when they get in that car in practice in Bahrain before the season's even started, they know within a few laps whether it's going to be a good year or not. Now, of course, some cars do change drastically over the course of a season, and one upgrade can change the fate of a car substantially. But this upgrade is intended to make it so they can actually run the car at the ride height they want without generating some serious instability, and also without wearing the plank so much that they get disqualified from the race, such as in China. So those are the two key intentions. If it achieves that, and especially if it makes the car more stable in qualifying, Ferrari will be a serious threat, I would say, in the second half of the season. Hamilton and Leclerc certainly will be hoping for that, even though it is very, very clear indeed that the title is long gone at this moment. So some quite substantial changes to the car. What it's going to mean for the rest of the season, that remains the big question, and also the implications for 2026 and beyond as well. The other big update, and a positive one for Ferrari, is on this hydraulic steering issue. So if you guys heard about this, we talked about it, I think it was during the Silverstone Grand Prix weekend, when Charles Leclerc was clear that there was an issue that was affecting Ferrari in the final parts of qualifying, in the Q2 and the Q3s, like on the big runs. And to be fair, the data indicated that. If you went and looked at Hamilton and Leclerc's final flying lap in Q3, they basically did the same time as they did in Q2, whereas everybody else improved by a good few tenths. And Leclerc's theory was, he didn't want to say what it was, but there's an issue with their car where when it's right on the limits, super empty of fuel, it's just more difficult to handle. And there was a rumour that that's to do with effectively the power steering or the hydraulic steering, and it becomes a little inconsistent or more challenging to drive. And, well, Fred Vasseur said, I'm not going to comment on what that issue is, but we're confident we can solve it. That's basically what he said. And Leclerc was less confident. But there is a rumour that, yes, Ferrari apparently they may have worked on this and they might have solved it. But whether they have, who knows? It's a pretty perfect time to try and solve it. You've got a new rear suspension coming in. There's a big Grand Prix in Belgium coming up in a few days. Ideally, you solve the problem and you give the guys the best chance for the second half of the season, but it's not clear that's going to be happening. So yeah, today's promotional event was clearly far more valuable than that potentially. And just before we close out the video, a couple of interesting comments. McLaren have an upgrade on the way as well. Now, what was interesting about this, of course, McLaren dominated the British Grand Prix. It wasn't even close. In those conditions, they were absolutely untouchable, even by Nico Hülkenberg. But in FP1 that weekend, they tried a new floor upgrade, just a little tweak. And the thing is, for McLaren, it's kind of tough to upgrade that car. But, you know, one of their key strengths, maintaining the temperature of the rear tyres, certainly on some of the harder compounds, this type of stuff. And we've seen that play out again, really, over the last few weekends. But yeah, floor upgrades. But they tried it in FP1 and the intention was always put it on the car, try and free practice, and then just give up, right? And then just go on our regular spec for the rest of the weekends. Because it's not like McLaren needed the upgrade, but they wanted to try it. And as a result, they are, it seems, planning to introduce it, right? So that's the scary thing, that McLaren tried something in Silverstone, never with the intention to introduce it that weekend, because they knew that they would be good enough regardless, and they were confident in the setup they'd worked on prior to the weekend. But now they know enough, based on those FP1 runnings, based on, you know, what they tried at the British Grand Prix, that they can maybe introduce it now, and it might make them even better. I think the real question is not whether it makes them much better, because at the end of the day, they're winning the championship anyway. The question is whether it helps one driver or another. There is a theory that over, you know, an upgrade they introduced a few rounds ago that actually wasn't an upgrade. I think it was a maybe slight suspension tweak or something at the front of the car, I think, that Lando elected to use and Oscar didn't. It wasn't, the McLaren didn't say it was an upgrade. They simply said it was an alternative approach, and Piastri stuck with what they were previously using. Lando took the new option, and it seems that Lando's a bit more comfortable with that than he previously was. Not to say that Piastri's fallen off or gone anywhere, because I think he's very much so, especially in Spa. I expect Piastri to be right back up there, and to be honest, I expect Piastri to win the Belgian Grand Prix. But I do think that it's very compelling between these two championship rivals right now. And even Alain Prost had a good few thoughts on it and maybe sees a bit of himself in Oscar Piastri and says, I like the way he behaves, it's a little like me, thinking about when to do the right manoeuvre or overtaken and being a little bit more clever. I like him, right? So maybe he sees a little bit of the professor in Oscar Piastri, and I totally get that, right? I mean, I think Piastri's an interesting driver because there's certainly plenty of drivers that you could look to compare him to in the history of Formula One. And I think as we learn more about Oscar as a championship challenger, we'll kind of get a greater glimpse as to who to compare him to, because certainly people compared him to Prost, and Prost now gives his comment on the matter. I think as time goes on, you know, we might start to see, and I think we have started to see, a little bit of a different side to Piastri, you know, breaking, I wouldn't call it a veneer precisely, but I think like there is clearly a ruthless racer in there, and we haven't always seen it in the first half of the season, but at times in Austria, where he was pushed off track by Colapinto, was fuming about it, had the roast of Alpine on the radio, and then in Silverstone, we know what happened there, was still steaming after the race. You know, I think we're going to see a little bit more of that real, you know, fire underneath the surface of Oscar Piastri and the cool, calm, collected outer demeanour that I think is going to give some people some, let's say, other characters in F1 history to compare him to. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.